Good day, economic students. This video is for question 10, 11, and 12 of the semester test that you wrote, Economics 2B. Question 10 says, indicate which of the following statements are correct or incorrect. Mark within X. So number 1 says, the moment that extra consumption is smaller than current consumption, the 1 period return to capital accumulation is positive. This is incorrect. Capital accumulation is positive only when the current consumption is less than the extra consumption, meaning that in this case, if it said extra consumption is greater than the current consumption, then it would be positive. This whole statement then would be correct, but it is negative if extra consumption is smaller than current consumption. Number 2, capital accumulation essentially consists of withholding some output for future consumption, investing this output in some sort of equipment, and using this equipment to produce output in the future. This is also incorrect. Capital accumulation consists of withholding some output from current consumption so that it can be used or it can be consumed in future. So it's about withholding some output or some input from current consumption for future consumption, not the other way around. Okay, so let's go to question 3. Question 3 says, choose the correct option. Assume that capital is measured on the vertical side and labor on the horizontal side. Okay. Then the first statement says, due to a decrease in cost per unit of labor, ceteris paribus, the firm decides to increase, decrease, or maintain the number of units of labor. Okay, here we have two inputs, which is capital and labor. So once the price or the cost of one input decreases, then the firm will employ more of that input. In this case, they say there's a decrease in the cost of per unit of labor. Therefore, the firm must employ or will employ more units of labor because it is now cheap to employ labor in the production process, right? So in this case, first statement, you'll choose increase. So the firm decides to increase the number of units of labor, okay? Because labor now, it is relatively cheap than it was before. The statement number 2 says, the firm is therefore known as becoming capital intensive or labor intensive. In this case, we chose labor intensive. We are saying that the firm is labor intensive in its production because it employed more of labor than that of capital. It is cheap for them to employ labor than to employ capital. Okay. The elasticity of substitution of this firm is high implying that the MRTS will change substantially or will not change much. Because we said this firm will be labor intensive, therefore the slope of this graph that we were told that we should assume certain graph was given, you can also draw it on your paper and see how it works. The slope will not change much because it says because it is the substitution between the two inputs. Okay, so the slope will not change much because remember the slope of this graph equals the MRTS of that graph also, which is also the same as maybe changing, it's going to be, in this case, it's going to be change in capital over change in labor. So the slope will not change much because these are substitute inputs or substitute factors. So this statement will say it will not change much. And then, okay, because the slope of the isoquant is relatively flat, it will not change that much. It will change, but not that much. So in this case, we will choose flat. Obviously, when you move from one point to a bigger point, in substitute goods or substitute inputs, the slope will be flat. And then number 5 says capital and labor are complements or substitutes because they can be easily swapped. In this case, capital and labor are substitute because they can be easily swapped. If labor is expensive, let's say if cost per unit of labor increases, the firm would rather go for using capital in its production. And if capital increases and labor decreases, they'd rather go for labor in its production. Okay, that's it for question 11. Okay, yeah, here it is: decrease, labor intensive, will not change much, flat and substitute. Okay, question 12. Question 12 says assume capital to be measured on the vertical axis and labor on the horizontal axis. Same assumption as before. Then it says the results of an increase in the production budget, ceteris paribus, a change or no change in the price ratio of the two inputs. Okay, let me read that again. The results of an increase in the production or is a change or no change in the price of the two inputs. In this case, I think you need to understand the function of a budget, production budget. So in this case, a production budget looks at the number of units that must be produced given a certain outcome, right? Given a certain goal, I mean, or that certain target. Sorry. So a production budget looks at that. It does not affect the price ratio of the two products. And then it says as a result of the production budget increase, the equilibrium ratio of marginal product will increase or remain the same. Since we said an increase in the production budget will have no change in the price ratio, therefore there won't be any changes also in the equilibrium ratio. Remember, we get the equilibrium ratio through the price ratios. Since now price ratio is not affected, then therefore the equilibrium ratio is also not going to be affected, meaning that in this point it will remain the same. The marginal product will remain the same. And then it continues to say a simultaneous decrease in the price of capital and an increase in the price of labor will result in, okay, let's first look at this. Decrease in price of capital. When this means that employing capital is cheaper at this point, and then an increase in the price of labor. Okay, employing capital is cheaper, meaning that it decreased. So it's cheaper to employ capital than to employ labor, because labor, the cost of labor, it increased while the cost of capital decreased. That simultaneous change there. So in this case, we'll say, we're given two options: a capital intensive biased capital and labor cost change, or a labor intensive biased in capital and labor cost change. So the correct answer will be a capital intensive biased capital and labor cost change. This is because from this statement, it means that it became cheaper to employ capital, and then it became expensive to employ labor. So the price of labor increased. Therefore, we will put less of labor in the production process and put more of capital in the production process. So this production now is capital intensive biased capital, and labor cost will change obviously, because now that it is expensive, we will shift from using more of labor to decreasing the use of labor by increasing the use of capital, right? So it says a capital intensive labor cost change entails a greater or smaller labor intercept. When a production is said to be capital intensive labor then therefore the labor cost change means that the intercept, if let's say for example you were employing 30 units of labor, and then now the price of labor increased to maybe from 10 to 20, you will shift from that. I said you employed 30 units of labor. You will shift from 30 maybe to a 15, because now it became expensive for you to employ labor. So the intercept will decrease, will be small, and then the intercept of capital alternatively will be higher, because if you were using maybe 12 units, now because there was a decrease in price of capital, from 12 you move to maybe 18, while from labor you move from 30 to 15. You see that change, the intercept change in this case when we say production is capital intensive. Okay, or also here is small. Okay, or this statement here says a labor intensive biased cost change entails that now if the production is labor intensive, it means that it's advisable for the firm, or it's wise for the firm to employ labor than it is to employ capital. So if it's cheaper for them to employ to employ labor, then therefore the intercept for capital will be small, and intercept for labor will be high. If a production is capital intensive, the intercept for labor will be smaller, and the intercept for capital will be high. But in a case where production is said to be labor intensive, the intercept for capital will be small, and the intercept for labor will be high. Hope it's clear. That's it for this video. Thank you and enjoy your economic studies, because we're going to explore more and more and more of interesting topics to come.